Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Peter Thompson, Partnerships Manager at IPSE. Our webinar this afternoon is from SJD Accountancy, who are our partner for company accounting services. The webinar this afternoon is Contractor Trends in 2020 and what can we learn for 2021. If you have any questions during the webinar, please drop them in the comments box. A recording of the webinar will be posted within 24 hours of this event, so you'll be able to re-listen to it another time. So I'd like to hand you over to James Foster and Joanne Harris, who will share the results of SJD's 2020 Contractor Survey, which was taken from over 2,000 independent professionals. So James and Joanne, over to you.
Hi guys, thanks everyone for joining us today. So first of all, we'll just do some brief intros. So my name is James Foster. I work at SJD Accountancy as a Senior Commercial Manager, and my colleague joining us today is Joanne Harris, who works as our Technical Commercial Manager.
Hello, hi everyone.
So now would be a good time to add that on your screen. You should be able to see an option to ask questions throughout. So please feel free to do so, as there's a 5-minute slot at the end for a Q&A. Although any questions that we don't get around to answering, we'll make sure that we answer them after the session, and we'll ask IPSE to send these back to you directly. Alternatively, you'll see an email address on the screen, so feel free to either email us, or there's also a number as well, so we'll get back to you.
Yeah, so before we start, it'd be good to briefly mention who SJD Accountancy are for those who haven't heard of us. We're the largest accountancy firm that specialises in contractors and freelancers. However, we also make up part of a large group called the Optionis Group, and all the brands within Optionis focus on contractors and freelancers too, ranging from umbrella employment to tax rebate services and of course accountancy. So across the group, we've got a wealth of experience in supporting contractors and freelancers.
So today on the webinar, what we'll be focusing on is our 2020 contractor survey that was ran earlier this year. As we mentioned, it went out to 2,300 contractors that responded. So we'll be exploring the results from this survey and then sharing what we actually think will be the future of contracting and freelancer industry based on those responses. The independent workforce has arguably never been more important to the economy and the society. We produce the contractor survey every year to gather key insights and opinions from the independent professionals throughout the UK, and then we look at the trends year on year. The findings are published within our white paper, which you'll be able to download following this webinar. So let's begin. So before we look at the 2020 results, it'll be good to briefly look at 2019. Obviously, 2019 and 2020 have been very different years, so we'll look at what the respondents were saying in 2019 first. So most respondents, 79%, as you can see on the screen, were aware of the IR35 reforms to the private sector that were due to take place at the time in April 2020. So this was, of course, later deferred to April 2021, so we've still got that to anticipate. And I think when you look at this, although 79% obviously seems like a very large percentage, when you flip that on its head and you say 21% of contractors weren't aware of it, it's actually quite concerning. It's a very huge piece of legislation that's going to have a big impact on contractors' take-home pay. So I think at the time we found it quite concerning. I think if you're joining this webinar now and you're not aware of IR35, I would definitely urge you to read up on it as soon as you can. We've got plenty of resources on our website, as do IPSE, so definitely want to read up on it if you're not aware. One of the other results were that 46.5% of respondents had their most recent contract based in London, which isn't exactly surprising, but it'll be something we'll touch on later on and how it could potentially look next year. 46.5, large businesses, which we would class as businesses with over 250 employees, were the most popular option for respondents. So 79% of respondents declared that their recent contract was for one of these large businesses, and almost a quarter, at 22.9%, of respondents began contracting aged 31 to 35 years old. And again, we'll touch on the comparison for 2020 shortly. 31.6% of respondents saw themselves contracting for 11 years or longer. And I think this is a huge number when you look at the earlier percentage of 79% of respondents were aware of the IR35 reforms. So despite those reforms, most contractors, or a very large percentage of contractors, still saw themselves contracting for the considerable future. As we said earlier, the landscape in 2019 was completely different to the landscape in 2020, which is largely due to coronavirus and the significant impact it's had, not just on freelancers, but the whole of the UK population and world population. So on that note, we'll now look at the 2020 results.
Hello, my apologies. I was muted by the organiser, so I think, Wade, I was causing the problems with the sound then. I'll remember to pop myself on mute when I'm not speaking, but hopefully that's a bit better for you now. Let us know anyway. So this year we had a 24% increase on the previous year in the number of contractors who very kindly shared their opinions, experiences and predictions with us, which obviously we're very grateful for. In the end, having 2,300, 2,500 contractors that responded to us. This year's survey revealed a vast amount of insight over many different topics. The ones we will highlight on today's webinar will be contractors' views on the coronavirus crisis, of course, and the challenges they experienced and continue to experience throughout the pandemic. As with last year's survey, we looked into IR35 reform, which of course was postponed by a year until April 2021, and the impact contractors expect this to have on the economy and the future of their contracting career. And finally, we'll finish by exploring how contractors' income or projects works have changed over the last 12 months, along with the reasons why people choose to work independently and the motivations for beginning a contracting career. It's worth noting that we won't have enough time to cover everything that was asked and that is in the published white paper. So if you would like to receive a digital copy of it, please email us at hello@sjdaccountancy.com and we'll send this across as it covers other areas such as mortgages, pensions and a host of other topics.
So I think if you asked us at the beginning of 2020 what would be the main theme of our 2020 contractor survey, we would definitely have said the IR35 reform, which was due at the time to come in April 2020. And we most definitely wouldn't have expected to be discussing the impact of a worldwide pandemic, but here we are. So let's look at what the feedback was from contractors with regards to the pandemic and the impact that it's had on them. So contractors reported a downturn in business, as you'd expect. Most contractors reported that their work had been negatively affected by the crisis. As you can see on the screen, 64.5% have had at least one contract postponed or cancelled, with some contractors being asked by clients to cut back on the amount of work they provide also. Only 3% have experienced an upturn in work since the first lockdown in March. And as a result, 66.2% of contractors are concerned about their financial security. We know that few contractors have relied on the government for help. So even so, most independent professionals, 65.9%, have not applied for financial help from the government since the introduction of various coronavirus support schemes. So that's nearly 2 in 3 contractors that have not made the use of any government-backed business loans or placed themselves on furlough. However, when most of these have been affected by the crisis, this raises the question of whether these initiatives meet the specific needs of these individuals and whether these individuals can even access the support.
Yeah, so amongst the contractors that we surveyed, we found very little demand in particular for the furlough scheme, the CJRS. Despite limited company directors, it was confirmed by the government were eligible to access the scheme. Only 20% of the contractors we surveyed made use of it. Now, the scheme offers up to 80% of PAYE salary to a maximum of £2,500 per month until March 2021. And this is like the reluctance of directors to access it, probably likely due to the fact that it only covers PAYE salary, so not dividends drawn. It's a difficult decision then for an independent professional to weigh up whether they stop working and furlough themselves and access a scheme for very little, what is very, very little support, or just carry on battling through. It really makes financial sense in many cases to carry on and try and, you know, find work elsewhere. The quotes from the contractor survey were all very much along these lines of, you know, the furlough scheme is not accessible as a limited company director, it's not suitable, it's no help to me. After the job retention scheme, the second and third most common support received were mortgage holidays, 8.9%, VAT deferral, 8.5%, and the business bounce back loan at 6.2%. Whilst there's no doubt that each of those do offer some financial support and a valuable lifeline, no support, they are just deferrals on payments or loans that need to be repaid. They're not grants like the self-employed income support scheme, which many contractors didn't qualify for. I'm newly self-employed, directors of personal services, service companies, etc. And that's something that the government has quite rightly faced much criticism for. When considering the severe economic downturn, it's no surprise that 42% of contractors either feel very negative or negative about their future. In addition to coronavirus-related concerns, fears held about the introduction of the IR35 reform in April 2021 could also be contributing to that feeling. However, despite the many challenges created by the coronavirus pandemic, it's expected that long-term economic implications, contractors remain committed to working independently, with 72% of those surveyed planning to carry on working this way for at least the next 3 years. Included in that group is 27% of independent professionals who see themselves contracting for the next 11 years at least, which was down only 4% from 2019 survey results. And I mean, and considering the year that we've had, it really highlights how resilient contractors are, with most of them determined to carry on working for themselves. And this is reassuring, you know, as the UK faces up to the huge economic challenges to get the economy back on its feet, the flexibility and the talent of the contractor workforce will prove instrumental.
So now on to what we thought would have been the biggest theme for contractors in 2020. And of course, IR35 will still be set to have a big impact on the freelancer industry, and specifically for those who work through their own limited company. So the private sector reform is set to take place in April 2021, where it is following suit with the public sector reform, which happened way back in 2017. The private sector reforms were scheduled to come into effect from April 2020 initially. However, considering the impact of COVID-19, the government delayed this until April 2021, and there's no indication that this will not go ahead as planned. Therefore, we wanted to gain a wider understanding of the expected impact of the reform to the off-payroll working. So our findings highlight the concerns contractors have about the changes to the IR35 rules.
Sorry, I keep putting myself on mute and then struggling to get myself back off mute again, but hopefully it will help with the sound, so we'll carry on with that. Yeah, the negative perception of IR35 changes has resulted in 3/4 of contractors we surveyed expecting businesses to lose out as a direct result of their introduction. More than anything, this highlights the importance of businesses preparing for the changes so they can continue benefiting from engaging these workers. And there's little confidence really amongst contractors that that is the case. Because the reform will see medium and large private sector businesses determine the IR35 status, as has been the case in the public sector since 2017, few contractors are confident about clients' abilities to assess their tax position correctly. This has led many to fear that the changes could spell the end for contracting in the UK altogether.
I think just to add to that as well, and we saw with the responses for people that could see themselves contracting for 11+ years, even in the most recent survey. So I think on that sentiment of the end of contracting altogether, we of course disagree with that. I guess you could say we're biased, but contractors will always be an important and vital part of the UK workforce. And I think over time, businesses will adapt to ensure they don't lose out on what's effectively a really big pool of talents. Sorry for interrupting you, Joe.
No, you're all right, don't worry, don't worry. But despite the lack of confidence, most contractors have no plans to switch to permanent employment in response to the reforms. Many are exploring other ways of working and are committed, again, to remaining self-employed. Alternatives being considered include umbrella working, which 42.3% said they believe they will need to do in order to continue working independently. Another option is that 39.8% of survey respondents intend to explore is working overseas. This is a concern, given for the country generally, given the large numbers of contractors leaving the UK could severely impact the flexibility of the labour market and lead to skill shortages at what is already a very uncertain time.
So this year so far, the economic damage caused by the coronavirus lockdown has added to the concerns of contractors who are also readying themselves for the arrival of IR35 reform in the private sector in 2021. So these two main issues have cast a cloud of uncertainty over the contracting sector, with the pandemic in particular said to have virtually halted contractors being hired overnight. However, as businesses tentatively reopen and the wheels of the economy begin to turn again, the demand for independent professionals is picking back up again. But before looking too far ahead, we wanted to see what extent the challenges faced by contractors have affected their income and the types of projects that they take on. So nearly 3/4 of contractors, so 74.6%, command a day rate between 250 and 749. So earnings have remained resilient and unchanged for 59% of survey respondents throughout the pandemic and in the past 12 months. However, a quarter, 25%, have experienced a reduction in rates in the past year. A small but nonetheless significant number of contractors, 16%, say that their fees have increased.
We seem to be having still some sound issues. I know Charlotte's asked me to move a bit closer to the microphone, so I'm going to try that. You just might get a really big close-up of my face. So, apologies for that small problem. So, around 7 in 10 contractors, 68.8%, have not worked in the public sector in the past year. This could be a consequence of IR35 reform in 2017. Potentially, despite having been introduced over 3 years ago, many still hold concerns over whether public sector bodies are able to manage these changes. As a result, these findings show that contractors prefer to work in the private sector, perhaps due to the fact they continue to, currently anyway, determine their IR35 status until April 2021. 78.7% of contractors have held at least one private sector contract in the past 12 months, with 36% having worked on multiple projects. While the length of time spent working on one contract varies considerably, most contractors, 59%, are engaged anywhere between 4 and 12 months. This suggests that businesses view independent professionals as a temporary resource that can be brought in on relatively short-term contracts to provide additional support. To an extent, it begins to dispel the myth that contractors are engaged for the long term in a manner similar to employees. Also worth noting is that nearly 2/3, 63.4% of survey respondents view these timeframes as significant enough to allow them to deliver their projects successfully. Contractors are resourceful when it comes to winning work using various ways to source new projects. For example, 69.9% find work via recruitment agencies, which is perhaps unsurprising. 60% also use the network that they have built up over the years to win contracts, while 25% approach previous clients with whom they hold a successful working relationship. That's not to say these contractors are natural marketeers or even feel that they need to advertise their services though. Over half don't market their business at all, However, the small number of contractors who would like to, which was 11%, don't really know where to start.
So the benefits of freelancing, contracting and self-employment are well documented, so we won't go through those, but with opportunities to work as and when you want, with whom you want, while commanding a day rate that you see fit, I think they're kind of three of the main ones. It's no surprise that nearly 5 million people work for themselves in the UK. But what are the main drivers of independent working? Is the decision to start a business motivated by money, the chance to regain control, or is it the prospect of a healthy work-life balance? So rather than us try and answer that, we asked contractors why they went self-employed and whether this way of working has met their expectations and if they plan to continue working independently in years to come. So here is what we found out. More than half, at 58.4% of contractors, said that going self-employed was a conscious choice and not a move made due to redundancy or lack of permanent positions, while the two latter drivers together make up 30% of contractors surveyed. The fact that most freelancers and contractors are not forced into working this way should be seen as a big positive. And according to the individual surveyed, the decision to enter contracting is one that's paid off, with 9 in 10, at 90.8%, of the view that self-employment has so far met their expectations.
Yeah, freelancing has been chosen for a number of reasons. Our findings show that contractors started working this way for not just financial reasons. The largest group, 82, were attracted to the higher earning potential, but a better work-life balance, 55.5%, control over the financial security, 57.1%, and the opportunities to work flexibly at 46% were also cited as important factors. By and large, contractors have achieved what they set out to do when they went solo. So since becoming their own boss, contractors revealed a number of significant upsides to independent working. In response to multiple choice questions, 50% enjoyed the better work-life balance, 62% are happy about earning more and enjoy the flexibility that freelancing offers, whilst 66% are glad to be free from office politics. I can sympathise with that one. Contractors tend to gain their experience before going solo, but the age at which these contractors went self-employed varied really dramatically. 21% of respondents began contracting between the ages of 31 and 35, which was down slightly from 2019, nearly 23%. The most important takeaway for me from the survey was the age at which contractors started out really varied widely. There was no right time to start. There was no standout group. And it's never too late. 13% of our contractors surveyed were starting out after the age of 51. Additionally, more than half of those surveyed, 54.9%, have been contracting for at least 5 years, with 26% between 5 and 10 years, and 29% for over a decade. However, uncertainty may be impacting on long-term plans. The number of years these individuals see themselves contracting for is spread evenly, really, with nearly a quarter each planning to work this way for 1 to 2 or more years, 3 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, or 11 plus years. 11 plus years at 27.4% was down slightly from the 32% we saw in 2019. While the number of contractors unsure about a long-term future is relatively high, the combination of coronavirus, IR35 reform, and let's not forget Brexit, could be contributing to the feeling of negativity I've explored in the earlier sections. Despite this, and regardless of the difficulties, 61% would recommend contracting to a friend.
And I think in terms of referrals, we as a business know how prevalent referrals are within the contractor industry. Is each week we pay out hundreds of referral rewards to contractors that have been referred their friends to us. It's one of our main routes to market. So we know how important it is for contractors.
So for this webinar, we also wanted to look at insights outside of our own survey results. So here are a few that we found to be important insights for contractors.
So firstly, the REC reported that 53% of employers that hire agency workers use them to help manage uncertainty. And I think in recent years, it's safe to say that if there was a year where uncertainty was the key theme, it would be 2020. Other key reasons that employers gave in terms of importance for hiring agency workers were meeting peaks in demand, which was the highest at 73% in terms of importance, and responding to growth at 65%, and fast changing organisation requirements. Overall, given the uncertainty and fast changing organisational requirements, this hopefully will result in a positive outlook for the contingent workforce in 2021. I think both this stat and the next one that Joe's going to mention are very important for contractors, as we touched on earlier within the survey, 69.9% of contractors find work via recruitment agencies.
Yeah, so the REC has also reported that in the short term, which is the next 3 months, the intention to hire agency workers is net zero, which sounds negative, but in the circumstances is sort of positive, or maybe somewhere in between. It means that whilst some employers believe their contingent workforce will increase, some think it will decrease, and the overall feeling is that the numbers engaged, sort of contingent workers engaged, will remain roughly the same. It is an improvement on the report from October, which showed an expectation for a 3% decrease over the same period, which didn't happen. The more positive message is that the medium-term outlook, which looks at the next 4 to 12 months, saw an improvement on hiring intentions of 7% in the last rolling quarter, meaning that employers expect their agency workforce, so contingent workers engaged via an agency, to increase by 4% over this period.
And finally, IPSE also recently reported that the average quarterly earnings of freelancers has unsurprisingly fallen 24% over the past year, which is a huge drop. So we know from our survey that there have been a lot of freelancers that have had to drop their rates due to the pandemic, but IPSE have clarified that the most significant decrease that they found is instead due to the number of weeks each quarter that freelancers aren't working. So this reached a record high of 5.5 weeks out of 13 weeks last quarter, and it still remains close to 5 weeks for the current quarter. So looking at everything that we've discussed so far, I think the key question is, what does the future hold for freelancers?
So yeah, the alignment, the first point, the alignment of employment and tax status, my favourite topic, or not so favourite topics really. Currently the tax and legal frameworks relating to employment status are not aligned. So it's possible to be regarded, reformed, as an employee for tax purposes, but not employed for legal purposes, which means you're denied statutory employment rights while simultaneously paying the same tax as an employee. The issue was raised in the Taylor report back in 2017, and subsequently accepted by the government with the publication of the Good Work Plan, who said the government agreed that the right ambition is to ensure that the differences between the two systems are reduced to an absolute minimum, and will bring forward detailed proposals on how these frameworks could be aligned. So this commitment made in 2018, it's not really been acted on. The government is pressing ahead with the reforms to off-payroll working, which will create more of these zero rights employees, i.e. workers that are being regarded as employees for tax purposes only. And we're still hopeful that this will be addressed. However, it's unlikely to happen soon. It's only right, though, that two workers paying the same amount of tax and working in similar ways receive the same statutory rights and protections.
So we know from working with freelancers and contractors since 1992 that freelancers in general are a very agile workforce. Have shown they can react and adapt to changes, and we believe that this can now extend to the business structure in which they work. So, for example, a contractor in the past may have become very accustomed to switching from assignment to assignment, working with different end clients. Then post IR35 reform, and even leading up to the IR35 reforms between sort of now and April, they may also need to be able to switch between the business structures that they use. So, for example, they may need to work for a limited company for one assignment and then provide their services for an umbrella company for the next. So the contractors that are kind of more open to this will immediately have a larger pool of opportunities to look at, but also we appreciate at the same time that a lot of contractors that work through their own limited companies will only look at contracts that are outside IR35. The contractors that do look at inside IR35 contracts as well will obviously have a much larger pool of opportunities to look at.
Yeah, so moving on to tax changes. Not really a lot of positive things to say here, really. So, I mean, given the huge amount of money that the government spent in order to support the economy through the pandemic, tax rises are, well, inevitable, really. When announcing the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme, the Chancellor stated it's now much harder to justify the inconsistent contributions between people of different employment statuses. If we all want to benefit equally from state support, we must all pay in equally in the future. So many have taken that to mean that there will be national insurance contribution increases for sole traders and those in partnerships, and that they'll be increased in line with that of employees. It could make that, I mean, if that does happen, and it looks likely that it will, that could make incorporating, for example, and trading through your own limited company more attractive. However, that's unlikely to be in isolation. You know, there'll be other increases, one would assume. So there may be increases to corporation tax and dividend tax, essentially employment taxes that you know that we also need to take into consideration. Capital gains, tax on wealth rather than income, is likely to be a target despite the lifetime limit for entrepreneurs relief. Capital gains allowance being reduced at the last budget to 1 million, but there could potentially be further changes here as well. Of course, this needs to boost national finances, means the government will be possibly even more committed to bringing in the IR35 reforms, making a further delay very unlikely, in my opinion, although I did say that in April 2020. HMRC estimate that without reform, non-compliance with IR35 rules would cost the government 1.3 billion by 2023-24. Now, I don't agree that that's the case, and I don't necessarily agree that the IR35 reforms will increase compliance as much as force people on payroll that shouldn't be on payroll, but they're the figures that the government's working with. The difficulty with providing support to some throughout the crisis has also added to the urgency, to the need to reform the tax system and press ahead with things like making tax digital. If, for example, there was monthly reporting of self-employed earnings, not only would this give the government data to help the recently self-employed, it could possibly, arguably, help self-employed workers with cash flow. I'm confident that changes to the tax system will happen in time. The question regarding tax increases is really when rather than if. It's my opinion that the spring statement will be too soon to announce potentially tax changes. However, these are unprecedented times and we'll have to wait and see. Although I think we've seen calls for an emergency summer budget, we'll probably likely have to wait for the autumn for confirmation of these changes.
So I think in general, it's probably accepted that freelancers and contractors were already more suited to remote working than their permanent worker counterparts, especially office workers. So a lot of contractors already manage their businesses from home outside of their assignments. They were used to switching between assignments. So I think that the hope is that employers will look at contractors as a very viable option for working on key projects due to their independence and ease of remote working. The other benefit to employers having seen that workers can work from their homes rather than from their offices is that hopefully it will open up opportunities for contractors that would have previously been outside the range that they were willing to kind of travel to work. In our 2019 contractor survey, we saw that nearly half of respondents, at 46.5%, confirmed that their most recent contract was based in London. And for a lot of contractors, travelling to London just isn't feasible. But with less reluctance to hire remote workers, this will hopefully provide opportunities to those living outside of cities and in more remote areas.
Yeah, finally, I've said it before a few times throughout this presentation, but contingent workers are contractors, freelancers are resilient. We know that freelancers have been some of the hardest hit by the pandemic, and many have been left with little real support from the government. There's been much excellent campaigning on this issue from groups like IPSE, Forgotten Limited, Excluded UK, to name a few. And whilst this has gained support in Parliament, it's yet to result in the widening of support to the groups that have been left behind, despite further extensions to phase and CGRF. There does remain cross-party consensus of the need to maintain a flexible workforce, with both the government and the Labour Party understanding that this will be key in supporting a post-COVID economic recovery and ensuring that the UK remains competitive post-Brexit. Parties across the political spectrum recognise the important economic role played by contractors and freelancers, both in terms of providing highly skilled and flexible workforce and an increasing overall number of people active in the labour market. It would, however, be naive to think that despite the lack of support, there won't be tax increases for the contingent workforce, and you may need to, I think James already touched on this earlier, but be a bit fluid with your business model. It may make sense to be limited, sole trader, umbrella. It may make one or more than one of those options more attractive depending on the changes to the tax system. However, we've been around since 1992, and one thing that we do know at SJD is that contractors are resilient. They will continue. Looking at the contractors that we work with, 15% of those incorporated before the last recession back in 2008 are still with us and have been trading then for 12 years.
So thanks to everyone that has been sending in questions. So we're going to start going through these now, and don't worry if we don't get a chance to answer yours, as we will be able to come back to you after the webinar. So Jo, do you want to start going through these now? Yeah,
of course. I mean, the first thing to say is apologies for the sound. I'm really conscious that I'm leaning in really close to my computer now as well, so hopefully that's not too frightening to people on the call. I think we'll go first to a question from Adrian. So I'm just going to quickly read this out. I'm not prepared for this really, but I'd love to know what percentage of contractors wish they'd stated their employment status correctly when they were working inside IR35. At least we might still have the option of managing through own limited rather than via umbrella, which simply adds costs and inefficiency. I don't really know what you're getting at there, Adrian, but if you want to pop yourself off mute, I'm really, really happy to discuss it. I mean, I guess nobody wants to be assigned inside IR35, do they? You know, particularly when you're working through your own limited company, you effectively get all the downsides, so you're paying the employment taxes without getting the employment rights associated with it. I mean, really, working through an umbrella company does at least give you some basic employment rights. Of course, the ideal scenario is that you're outside of IR35 and you can carry on, but I guess it's just at this stage we're doing a lot of work with educating end hirers, and there are great companies out there that have some great status tools like some Kudos, etc., that are doing a lot of work with end hirers and recruitment agencies. So it's about getting that assessment right, really. So I'll go on with another question then. So I'm thinking of supplying
just to interrupt there, there may be people that whilst we're going through those kind of stats that you might have been thinking, oh, I would love to know this. One thing to add is that we do the contractor survey every single year. So if there's something that you think this would be really useful to know, and I'd love to know how other contractors feel about this subject or this specific topic, then email us. Our email will be on the next slide, so it's hello@sjaccountancy.com, and we will be doing a contractor survey next year as well. So if there's things that you'd like to know, then by all means let us know.
Yeah, please do. all suggestions gratefully appreciated there. So the next question now, I'm thinking of supply services overseas from April. Is this possible with Brexit, and would IR35 still apply? That's a good question. So should we go for Brexit first? I mean, at the moment we don't have a deal, do we? So nobody really knows how the supply of services into the EU will work post the 31st of December. It is, I believe, a deal. I believe news was imminent yesterday, but I don't think we do have a deal just yet. It's a case of waiting and seeing, really. I mean, from an IR35 perspective, if your end hirer is based outside of the UK, then IR35 will still apply to you, but it will be your responsibility, as it is now, to assess the IR35 status of an assignment. So that responsibility will stay with yourself rather than passing over to the end hirer. I have got a problem with my question box now, but hopefully that's answered that question for you.
That's fine. I can jump in because I can see a question. So there's a question to say, I'm a limited company director, but will need to use an umbrella company for my assignment. Would you suggest I close the company? Joe, do you just want to quickly go on mute? I think I can hear an echo.
Yeah, I'm causing problems with the sound again, am I? One moment.
No worries. It's something we're all used to with Teams and Zoom calls, so it's nothing new. So yeah, the question on whether you should close your company if you're going into an umbrella assignment, I think it really depends on what your kind of long-term intentions are. So if you're going to take a kind of short-term assignment, maybe 3 to 6 months, where you do need to use an umbrella company, the question would be, well, do you foresee yourself using your limited company again in future? If your intentions are always to, when there is the opportunity to take an outside IR35 contract and return to using your limited company, then it would make more sense to kind of keep your company open in a non-trading state. One thing to note with closing companies is if you close your company and you want to benefit from the capital gain, i.e., which would be the profit left over in the business that you receive when you close it, if you want that to be classed as entrepreneur's relief, where it'd be taxed at 10%, you can only do that if you haven't closed the company within 2 years. So if you close a company and you expect to reopen it within 6 months, then you shouldn't really close the company because you won't be able to get the benefit of the entrepreneur's relief. I think what a lot of people that we've spoken to and we surveyed on this quite recently is a lot of contractors don't intend to close their company. I think given the choice, they would prefer to keep the company open in a non-trading state. One thing that we're looking into prior to April is a proposition that will allow you to switch back and forth between the two. So kind of like a hybrid proposition where you'd be able to have your company in a non-trading state, but also have umbrella employment, and your company's there waiting for you once you get the outside IR35 contract, and you've still got a dedicated accountant. So yeah, going back to the original question, it completely depends on what your long-term intentions are. If you don't expect to return to contracting for a limited company, then yeah, it'd probably be cost efficient for you to look into closing it. A lot of people, it's hard to look beyond the next 3 to 6 months, so it might not really matter about your intentions because you don't know where you'll be in sort of 3 months time, 6 months time. If that is the case, you may want to keep it open just so you have got the flexibility of returning to using that limited company in future if you're unsure. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, I would I agree with what James said. Didn't want to butt in because I have to unmute myself to butt in, but yes. Are we able to contest a particular assignment if it can be outside IR35? So I think what this particular question is referring to is, are you able to and I assume this is it, please correct me if I'm wrong, are you able to appeal against an I-35 decision? So you might be aware that come 6th of April 2021, Rentira will need to provide you with a status determination statement, which will advise you of their assessment of the assignment, so the fact that it's either inside IR35 or outside IR35. If you were to be given a status determination statement that you disagree with, you do have the right to challenge that through a client-led disagreement process. So you can make written representations to the end hirer, and you should state the reasons why you disagree with them. It might be helpful to get it professionally assessed, your contracts and working conditions, just so you can go back with sort of a robust argument as to why you believe that assignment falls outside of IR35 rather than inside. But there is a process. They do need to respond to you within 45 days. But ultimately, it is their decision, so you can't force their hand on it. You can make your representations and you can vote with your feet, not accept the assignment, but that's really it. Once you've made those representations, it's up to the end hirer to come back to you and to either with a new status determination statement or the reasons why they won't be updating their decision. Okay. I think that is all of the questions, unless anybody has any that I've missed. I'm just checking the chat boxes, but if anybody would like to ask a question, that's fine. Otherwise, we will wrap up a little bit early. As we said, this presentation will be emailed over to you. And if you would like to receive a copy of the full white paper, the contractor survey, that'll be out next week, I believe, James. If you just drop an email over to hello@sjdaccountancy.com, sorry, then we will make sure that you receive a copy as soon as it's out.
Yeah, so if you do have any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, feel free to email the email on the screen now. So from myself and Joe, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day. Apologies for the sound issues if they weren't resolved, but yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and feel free to email if there are any suggestions that you'd like to see included within next year's survey.